I was never the type of man to ignore a leak. In my line of work, a leak isn't just water. It's a failure of structure. It's a sign that something you thought was solid has given way. My name is Arthur Miller. I spent 40 years as a structural engineer, building bridges and office blocks that were meant to outlast me. I like things that are level. I like things that are built on a firm foundation. But lately, the only thing I've been building is a legacy for my grandson, Leo. Leo is a genius. Or at least, that's what my daughter-in-law, Alina, tells me every single day. He's 19 now, studying advanced physics over in England at Oxford. I haven't seen him in person for 10 years, not since my son passed away and Alina decided a fresh start in Europe was best for the boy. But we talk, we exchange emails. I send the money for the tuition, the housing, the lab fees. It's not cheap. But what else is a retired man supposed to do with his pension? You invest in the future. You invest in your blood. It was a Tuesday morning, back in April of 2026, when I saw the stain on the ceiling of my guest room. It was a small, brownish ring, right above the antique dresser. My house in Pennsylvania is old, but I've always kept it in tip-top shape. A leak meant a loose shingle or a cracked flashing. I'm 69 years old. My knees aren't what they used to be, but I can still climb a pull-down ladder. I grabbed my flashlight and headed up to the attic. The attic is a graveyard of things we couldn't bring ourselves to throw away. My late wife's sewing machine. My son's old baseball trophies. Stacks of blueprints from projects I finished 30 years ago. It's dusty, cramped, and smells like old pine and insulation. I found the source of the water pretty quickly. A small seep near the north chimney. But to get to it, I had to move a heavy mahogany wardrobe that had been pushed into the far corner, right against the eaves. It was a beast of a piece. I braced my feet and shoved. As the wardrobe scraped across the floorboards, something fell from the narrow gap between the back of the wood and the wall. It wasn't dust. It was a small plastic accordion folder, the kind people use to keep tax receipts or bank statements. It was covered in a thick layer of gray grime. I picked it up, thinking it was probably some old tax return from the 90s. I sat down on a crate of holiday decorations and flipped the latch. Inside were medical records. Most of them belonged to my son David from the years before he died. Dental cleanings. A broken wrist from a fall at work. Normal stuff. But then, tucked in the very back, I found a yellowed slip of paper. It was an emergency room intake form from the County General Hospital. The date at the top was July 14, 2016. 10 years ago. I squinted at the name on the form, Leo Miller, age 9. I remembered that summer. That was the year Alina told me Leo had a severe bout of pneumonia and had to be rushed to a private clinic in the city. She told me he was too weak for visitors. A week later, she told me they were moving to London for the better air and the specialized doctors. I looked closer at the form. It wasn't for pneumonia. The intake notes mentioned a car accident, multiple trauma, blunt force. My heart started to do a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I turned the page. It was a discharge summary, or at least it started out as one. But the bottom half of the page was different. There was a box labeled status. In that box, someone had written a word, but it had been scratched out so hard the paper was nearly torn. Above the scratch, in a different pen, someone had neatly printed the word transferred. I've spent my life looking at blueprints. I know when a line has been altered. I know when a drawing has been tampered with to hide a flaw in the design. I sat there in the dark, dusty corner of my attic, with the water dripping slowly into a bucket nearby. I thought about the voice I hear on the phone every month, the young man with the British accent who tells me about his physics equations and thanks me for the wire transfers. I thought about Alina. She's been so good to me. She stops by 3 times a week with groceries. She handles my mail. She's the one who set up the automated payments from my retirement account to the school in England. She's the only family I have left. I looked at the emergency room form again. 2016. July 14th. According to the letters I have saved in my desk downstairs, Leo was supposed to be in a summer camp in Maine that week. Alina had sent me photos of him sitting by a campfire. I rubbed the dust off my fingers, but the chill wouldn't go away. If Leo was in that hospital 10 years ago, why did the records end up in a sealed folder behind a wardrobe in my attic? And if that word under the ink was what I thought it was, who exactly have I been talking to all these years? I looked up at the rafters. The leak was still there. But for the first time in my life, I realized that the house I was living in wasn't the one I thought I'd built. I wasn't just looking at a damp roof. I was looking at a hole in my entire life. I tucked the folder under my arm and climbed down the ladder. My hands were shaking, just a little bit. I needed to see Elena. But more than that, I needed to hear my grandson's voice. Truly hear it. Because suddenly, the silence from England felt very, very loud. I spent 40 years looking at blueprints, calculating loads, and making sure that foundations didn't crack under pressure. If there is one thing an engineer knows, it is that you cannot fix a structure once the ground starts to shift. You have to notice the settling early. You have to watch the hairline fractures in the plaster before the whole roof comes down. The folder I found in the attic, that yellowed hospital form from July 14, 2016, was a fracture. A deep one. It sat on my nightstand now. A heavy weight in a room that suddenly felt too large. It told me my grandson Leo was in a car crash 10 years ago. It had a word scratched out that looked an awful lot like deceased. But Alina, my daughter-in-law, had told me for a decade that Leo was in England. She said he was a genius, a boy born for equations in physics labs, far away from the small town dust of Pennsylvania. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. When my son David died in that construction accident back in 2015, it felt like the main support beam of my life had snapped. David was a good man, a hard worker, but he didn't have much sense for money. He left Alina with a mountain of debt and a 9-year-old boy. I stepped in because that is what a man does. I told Alina I would handle everything. The mortgage, the bills, and especially Leo's future. I haven't seen Leo in person since 2016. Alina said the move to London was for the best. Better schools, a fresh start away from the shadow of his father's death. I've been paying for it all. $5,000 every single month, wired to an account she set up. It's nearly every penny of my pension and the interest from my savings. I live simple so that Leo can live grand. That was the deal I made with myself. But that night, after finding the folder, the silence in the house started to hum. It was a cold, lonely sound. I looked at my new smartphone, the one Alina told me I needed so I could stay connected. She usually handles the calls. She says the international roaming is too complex for me, or the time difference in London makes it hard to catch him. She's always the middleman. I decided to try it myself. I sat in my recliner, the house dark except for the lamp by my chair. It was 10 o'clock in the evening. In London, that would be 3 in the morning. Maybe too late, but I was restless. I opened the app Alina had installed for our video chats. I pressed the button for Leo's contact. The phone rang and rang. It felt like every ring was a hammer hitting a nail. Finally, the screen flickered, but the call was declined. A message popped up instantly. Busy in the lab, Grandpa. Talk soon. I tried again 5 minutes later. Declined again. Then my own phone buzzed. It was a text from Alina. Arthur, is everything okay? I just got an alert that you were trying to call Leo. He's in the middle of a major experiment. You know how strict they are at Oxford. Don't distract him, okay? I'll have him send you a voice note in the morning. I stared at the screen. How did she know? How did she get an alert on her phone just because I tried to call my own grandson? It felt like a leash. A short, tight leash. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about David. He was a quiet kid, liked to build birdhouses with me in the garage. He had his mother's eyes. Leo was supposed to be the same. Every time I send that money, I feel like I'm keeping David's memory alive. I'm making sure the Miller name stands for something more than just a tragic accident on a job site. Around 2 in the morning, my phone chimed. A voicemail had arrived. I put the phone in my ear, my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. Hey, Grandpa, it's Leo. Sorry I missed you. The lab is crazy right now. The professor has us working on the new particle collision data. It's brilliant stuff. I really appreciate you helping me stay here. I couldn't do any of this without you. Love you. The voice was young, clear, and had that light British lilt he'd picked up over the years. It was the voice I'd heard for a decade. It was the voice that cost me $60,000 a year. I played it again. I held the speaker right against my ear, closing my eyes. I wanted to hear the boy. I wanted to hear David's son. But this time, I listened like an engineer. I listened for the background noise. Usually, there is the hum of a lab or the sound of a hallway. This time, there was a strange rhythmic clicking. A tiny, metallic static that sounded like a skip in an old record player. It wasn't room noise. It was digital noise. It sounded like a machine trying to breathe. Then came the end of the message. The voice said, I was thinking about the old days today. I really missed the way Grandma Martha used to make those apple pies. I sat bolt upright in the dark. The air in the room suddenly felt like ice. My wife, my late wife who passed away before David was even married, her name was Rose. Rose. David's mother was Rose. She died when Leo was just a baby. He wouldn't have remembered her pies, but more importantly, he would never ever call her Martha. Martha was Alina's mother. The woman Leo barely knew before they moved away. A grandson doesn't forget his own grandmother's name. Not a genius, not a Miller. I looked at the phone in my hand. It felt like a piece of hot coal. The voice on the other end was perfect. It had the right tone, the right laugh. But it didn't have the right memory. It was a perfect recording of a lie. I realized then that Alina wasn't just my daughter-in-law helping me stay in touch with my family. She was a gatekeeper. She was standing at the door of a room that had been empty for 10 years, charging me admission to see a ghost. I stood up and went to the window. The street outside was empty. The small town of my youth was asleep, quiet and steady. But in my mind, the blueprints were tearing. The bridge was falling. I needed to know where that money was going. I needed to know who was actually talking to me from the shadows of a digital lab. And most of all, I needed to know what really happened on July 14, 2016. I picked up the phone again. I didn't call Alina. I didn't call the lab. I looked through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't dialed in a long time. Sam Evans. We used to call him Rusty back in high school. He's the sharpest tax lawyer in the county and a man who hates a liar as much as I hate a weak foundation. The sun was going to come up in a few hours. And when it did, I was going to start taking this structure apart, brick by brick, until I found the truth buried in the dirt. I walked into Sam's office carrying a heavy knot in my stomach. Sam Evans has been my friend for 50 years. We call him Rusty, mostly because of the color his hair used to be before it decided to leave him entirely. He is a retired tax lawyer who spent 4 decades digging through the kind of paperwork that makes most men want to go blind. If there is a crooked line in a ledger, Sam will find it. He was sitting behind a desk piled high with fishing magazines and legal briefs. A half-empty glass of bourbon sitting near his elbow. I didn't say much. I just handed him the medical folder I found in the attic and told him about the strange voicemail from my grandson. I told him about the name Martha. Sam didn't look up for a long time. He put on his reading glasses and studied that hospital form from July 14, 2016. He traced the scratched-out words with a thick finger. Then he looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw Sam Evans look truly sad. "Arthur," he said, his voice low. "You have been wiring $5,000 a month to an account in London for 10 years. That is $600,000. Are you sure you want me to look at where that money went?" I told him I was sure. I told him I was a structural engineer, and I couldn't live in a house with a rotten foundation. He nodded, turned to his computer, and started typing. Sam still has access to the old databases. He knows how to track a rutting number like a hound tracks a scent. We sat in silence for an hour. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional click of Sam's mouse. I watched the sun start to go down over the town square. I thought about Alina. I thought about how she used to bring me soup when I had the flu. How she cried at David's funeral. I thought about the way she hugged me every time I signed a new authorization for Leo's tuition. "Arthur," Sam said suddenly. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the screen. "This London account. The one for the Oxford Research Fund. It's not in London." I felt a cold prickle at the back of my neck. "What do you mean?" I asked. "The routing number is local," Sam said. "The money goes to a branch in Scranton. From there, it gets moved within 24 hours to a private holding company called Real Estate Holdings. Arthur, EM stands for Alina Miller." I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under my chair. "I've been paying for a physics lab in England," I whispered. "I've been paying for Leo's future." Sam shook his head. "You've been paying for a lifestyle, Arthur. I just pulled the public records for that holding company. Alina bought 3 rental properties in the last 5 years. Cash. She's been using your retirement money as her personal investment fund. She's not just a real estate agent. She's a landlord, and you are the one who bought the buildings." I stood up, my hands shaking. The anger was starting to move in now, replacing the shock. It was a hot, stinging feeling in my chest. "She lied to me," I said. "She used David's son to steal from me." "It's worse than that," Sam said, his voice getting sharper. "I'm looking at your recent bank activity. You know those extra maintenance fees she asked you to cover last month? The ones for the advanced computer equipment. That money didn't go to a lab. It went to a tech consultant in Philadelphia who specializes in voice synthesis and digital masking." I leaned against the desk. My legs felt like they were made of water. I thought about the voice on the phone. The little digital clicks I heard. The way the boy called his grandmother Martha. Alina wasn't just stealing my money. She was buying the tools to keep the lie alive. She was paying someone to help her pretend my grandson was still breathing. "I'm going to her house," I said, reaching for my coat. "I'm going to confront her right now." "Arthur, stop," Sam barked. He stood up and grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong for a man his age. "You cannot do that. Look at me." I looked at him. His face was grim. "If you go over there and start screaming," Sam said, "she will win. Alina is 42 years old and she is a professional. You are 69. You've had a heart procedure. You've been confused about the attic. She has spent 10 years making herself look like the saint who takes care of the lonely, grieving old man. I'm not confused, I snapped. I have the papers right here. Sam shook his head. She'll say you're imagining things. She'll say the grief for David has finally broken your mind. She's already the secondary signer on your medical directives, Arthur. If she feels threatened, she won't go to jail. She'll call the county health board. She'll have you declared incompetent for your own safety. She'll put you in that assisted living facility over in Oak Haven, and she'll take the house too. I stared at him. The room felt like it was spinning. You're saying I can't even speak. I'm saying you have to be an engineer. Arthur, Sam said, his voice softening. You don't blow up a building when you find a crack. You shore up the walls. You gather your tools. You make sure the structure is sound before you pull the trigger. If you move now, you lose everything. Your money, your home, and your dignity. I sank back into the chair. The bourbon in Sam's glass looked like amber in the fading light. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my money. I was fighting for my life. Elena hadn't just built a lie. She had built a cage. And the door was locked from the outside. We have to find out what happened 10 years ago, Sam whispered. We have to find the real Leo. Until we have that, we have nothing but some suspicious bank transfers. We need the truth, Arthur. The whole truth. I looked at my old friend. I knew he was right. I had to go back into that house. I had to sit across the table from the woman who was bleeding me dry, and I had to smile. I had to pretend I was still the sweet, fading old man she thought I was. But as I walked out of Sam's office into the cool night air, I felt something shift inside me. The bridge wasn't down yet. I was still a Millard. And if Alina wanted to play with ghosts, she was about to find out that some ghosts have very long memories. I drove home slowly, watching the familiar houses pass by. Everything looked the same, but everything was different. I was an investigator now. And the first thing an investigator does is look for the person everyone else has overlooked. I needed a pair of eyes that Alina wouldn't suspect. I needed someone who saw the house when I wasn't looking. The paper trail was just the beginning. The real secrets were still hiding in the shadows of my own home, waiting for me to turn on the light. I didn't go to the police. Not yet. Sam was right about one thing. If you want to take down a structure that's been built on a lie, you don't just start swinging a sledgehammer. You find the key stress points. You look for the places where the weight is shifted. I spent the next 2 days acting like the same old Arthur. I ate the oatmeal Alina brought over. I smiled when she told me Leo had just won a prestigious physics prize in London. I even thanked her when she said she'd handle the latest $5,000 wire transfer for the lab equipment. But inside, I was cold. I was looking at her not as my daughter-in-law, but as a faulty blueprint. The real problem was the voice. I couldn't stop thinking about that voicemail. The way it sounded like Leo, but didn't know his own grandmother's name. I needed to understand how a ghost could talk. On Thursday afternoon, Sarah came by. She's the college girl from down the street who helps me with the garden and occasionally fixes my printer when it decides to stop talking to my computer. She's 21, smart, and she has that honest way of looking at you that people my age usually lose. Mr. Miller, you look like you've seen a ghost, she said, setting her bag down on my kitchen table. I tried to play it off, just some computer trouble. Sarah, I got a video file from a friend, and the audio sounds strange, like it's skipping. She sat down and opened my laptop. I played her the voicemail I'd saved. I watched her face. She didn't look confused. She looked interested. Oh, she said, leaning closer to the speakers. That's a bad render. A what? I asked. A render, Sarah explained. Look, Mr. Miller, have you heard about AI voice cloning? It's all over the internet now. You take a few minutes of someone's real voice, feed it into a program, and then you can make them say whatever you want. You just type the words, and the computer does the rest. I felt a chill move down my spine. You mean a computer can just make a person? She nodded. But this one is cheap. Listen to the sounds. They're too sharp. And that clicking in the background, that's the processing lag. Someone is using a real-time filter. I leaned back in my chair. Sarah, could someone use this to have a conversation? Like, over the phone? Sure, she said. If they have a fast enough connection. There are apps where a guy can talk into a microphone, and the software changes his voice to sound like a kid, or a woman, or, well, anyone. It's mostly used for video games, but some people use it for scams. I felt the room get very small. I've been talking to a ghost for 10 years, I thought. But the ghost was just a man in a room with a microphone. Sarah didn't know the weight of what she was telling me. She just thought she was explaining a new piece of tech to an old man. She showed me a website where you could upload a clip. She took a video of me talking about the weather, clicked a few buttons, and a minute later, my own voice came out of the laptop speakers, reciting a poem I'd never read. It sounded exactly like me. Every breath, every pause. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever heard. After Sarah left, I sat in the dark for a long time. I realized that the Oxford professor I'd been talking to, the one who called himself Mark and told me how proud he was of Leo, wasn't in England. He was probably right here in Pennsylvania. I went back to the paperwork Sam had given me. I looked at the payments to that tech consultant in Philadelphia. His name was Mark Thorne. I looked at a photo Elena had posted on her social media a few months ago. It was a picture of her at a real estate convention. Standing right next to her, with his arm around her waist in a way that didn't look like a business partner, was a man with a sharp beard and expensive glasses. The caption said, "My partner in everything, Mark, the professor, the voice. The man who was helping my daughter-in-law spend my pension." It wasn't just Alina. It was a team. They had turned my grief into a business model. They had taken the memory of my son and my grandson and turned it into a digital puppet show. I felt a hot, bubbling rage rising up in my throat. It wasn't just about the money anymore. They had stolen the last 10 years of my life. They had made me love a machine. But as an engineer, I knew that every system has a bypass. Every lock has a weak point. I went to my desk and pulled out a map of the local area. I started looking at the addresses of the rental properties Alina had bought with my money. One of them was a small cottage out by the lake, about 20 miles from my house. Elena told me she was renovating it for a client, but when I checked the utility bills in the files Sam had hacked for me, the internet usage at that cottage was off the charts. High speed, commercial grade. The kind you need for heavy data processing. The kind you need to run a digital ghost. I looked at the clock. It was nearly 9. Elena would be coming over tomorrow morning to help me with my taxes. I realized then that the biggest lie wasn't the voice on the phone. The biggest lie was the one I found in the attic. The hospital form from 2016. If Mark was the voice of the 19-year-old Leo, and Alina was the one managing the illusion, then where was the boy? I looked at that scratched out word on the medical form again, deceased. If Leo died in that car crash 10 years ago, why go to all this trouble? Why not just tell me? Why build a 10-year lie instead of just taking the inheritance and moving on? There was something else. Something bigger than just the $600,000. Something that happened on July 14, 2016, that Alina was so afraid of that she had to invent a living grandson to cover it up. I stood up and grabbed my car keys. I wasn't going to wait for Alina to come to me. I needed to see that cottage by the lake. I needed to see where the ghost lived. Because if the voice was fake, and the lab was fake, and the grandson was fake, then I needed to know what they had done with the body of the boy I loved. The drive was dark, the trees casting long shadows over the road. I felt like I was driving into a storm, but for the first time in a week, my hands were steady. I was a structural engineer, and I was going to find the crack that brought this whole house down. The drive to the lake cottage was dark, but the drive back was darker. I didn't stop. I didn't knock on that cabin door. Seeing Mark Thorne's car in the driveway next to Elena's was enough. Seeing the blue light of computer monitors reflecting off the water through the windows was enough. I knew where the ghost was being manufactured. But I still didn't know where the boy went. I got home at 3 in the morning. My house felt like a stranger's property. Every floorboard I had polished, every beam I had inspected, it all felt tainted. I went straight back to the attic. I didn't care about the noise. I didn't care if Alina heard me from her place down the road. I was done being a structural engineer who followed the safety codes. I was a man looking for a body. Behind the mahogany wardrobe in the very corner where the roof meets the floor, there was a small access panel. It was painted over, hidden by decades of neglect. I grabbed a crowbar from my toolbox and shoved the steel tip into the seam. I didn't gently pry. I ripped. The wood splintered with a sound like a bone breaking. Inside the crawl space, it was tight and smelled of dry rot. My flashlight beam cut through the cobwebs and landed on a heavy steel footlocker. It was a military-grade box, the kind my father brought back from the war. It was locked with a heavy master pad bolt. I didn't look for a key. I used a heavy-duty bolt cutter. One sharp snap, and the lock hit the floor. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the trunk just to stay upright. I lifted the lid. I expected money. I expected more bank statements. But there was nothing but a small velvet-lined case holding a child-sized violin, and beneath it a stack of papers. I pulled the first one out. It was a death certificate, not a draft, not a scratched-out form, a certified, stamped, and sealed document from the state of Pennsylvania. Name Leo David Miller. Date of death July 14, 2016. Cause of death traumatic brain injury due to motor vehicle accident. I stared at the name. My grandson. My Leo. He didn't go to London. He didn't go to a private clinic. He went into the ground 10 years ago. While I was sitting in my living room, writing checks for tuition, he was already gone. While I was listening to digital voices tell me about physics labs and particle collisions, my grandson was a memory that Alina had buried in a steel box so she could keep the checks coming. For 3,650 days, she had let me believe I had a future. She had let me wake up every morning thinking I was building a legacy. She had watched me mourn my son, and then she used my love for his boy to bleed me dry. $600,000. Every cent of my hard-earned life, given to the woman who wouldn't even let me visit a grave, because that grave didn't fit her business plan. Suddenly, I heard the front door open downstairs. It was 8 in the morning. Alina was early. She had her own key, of course. I stayed perfectly still in the dark crawl space, clutching the death certificate to my chest. I heard her humming a tune, a happy, light little melody. Then I heard her phone click. She was in the kitchen, right below me. "Hey, sweetie," I heard her say. Her voice was bright, full of that fake motherly warmth that had fooled me for a decade. "Are you ready for the big day? Grandpa is going to be so excited. I've got the script ready for the birthday message. Just remember to mention the new telescope. He'll love that. Okay, Mark, I'll see you at the cottage later. Love you." She laughed, a genuine, bubbly laugh. She was recording a script. She was preparing the ghost for another performance. She was standing in my kitchen, probably making a pot of coffee with my beans, while she planned the next step in the robbery. I stood there, holding that cold piece of paper, listening to her lauder through the floorboards. It's hard to imagine someone could be this heartless. If you've ever felt this kind of betrayal, just type justice in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one who thinks this is unforgivable. But I didn't cry. An engineer doesn't cry over ruins. We only think about how to rebuild. Or, in this case, how to demolish what's left of a rotten structure. I tucked the death certificate into my inner jacket pocket. I took the small violin too. I climbed down the ladder, moving slowly, making sure every step was silent. I didn't go into the kitchen. I went out the back door, through the garden I'd spent 20 years tending. I saw Sarah's car pull into her driveway next door. She was getting books out of her back seat. She looked up and saw me, and her smile faded. She saw my face, and she knew. "Mr. Miller," she whispered, walking toward the fence. "Are you okay?" I looked at her. She was 21 years old. She was real. She was working 2 jobs just to pay for seeds and soil. She was everything Alina was not. "I'm fine, Sarah," I said. My voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "I just found the flaw in the design." I walked to my truck. I didn't look back at the house. Alina was probably still in there, waiting for me to come down so she could show me a fake video of a boy who died 10 years ago. She thought I was an old man who couldn't see past his own grief. She thought my age made me soft. She forgot that the older a structure gets, the more you have to understand exactly what holds it together. She forgot that a man who knows how to build also knows exactly where to place the charges to bring the whole thing down in seconds. I drove straight to Sam's house. I didn't call. I just walked in. He was sitting on his porch, holding a mug of coffee. He took one look at the velvet violin case in my hand and the look in my eyes, and he stood up. "You found it, didn't you?" he asked. I laid the death certificate on his patio table. "I want it all, Sam," I said. "I want the money back. I want the house. But more than that, I want her to see the face of the man she thought she had broken." Sam looked at the paper, then back at me. "It's going to be a fight, Arthur. She's got her hooks in deep." "Then let's start digging," I said. "Because I'm done paying for ghosts. I'm ready to start looking for the truth." We spent the next 4 hours in Sam's basement, surrounded by old law books and glowing screens. We weren't just looking at bank statements anymore. We were looking at criminal fraud. We were looking at a conspiracy. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, I felt a cold hard peace settle over me. Alina Miller thought she was the architect of my life. She was wrong. I'm the engineer. And the inspection is just beginning. The next morning, the sun came up as if nothing had changed. I sat at my kitchen table, drinking black coffee and looking out at the yard. My hands didn't shake. When you've spent your life ensuring that high-rise buildings don't sway in a gale, you learn how to keep your own pulse steady. You learn that the most dangerous part of a demolition isn't the explosion. It's the few minutes before, when everything looks perfectly normal but the charges are already set. Alina arrived at 9:30 sharp. She let herself in with her key, her heels clicking on the linoleum with a cheerful, rhythmic snap. She was carrying a bag of fresh bagels and a folder of what she called university updates. She looked radiant. She looked like the kind of woman the whole town envied for her devotion to her lonely father-in-law. "Good morning, Arthur," she said, leaning down to plant a dry kiss on my cheek. You look like you slept well. Did you see the latest email from Leo? He sent over his thesis abstract. It's all very complicated, but the dean says he's the brightest student they've seen in years. I looked her right in the eye. I didn't see a daughter. I saw a structural failure. I did, Alina, I said. My voice was as level as a transit line. It's remarkable. In fact, it got me thinking. I'm 69. I've got that old commercial building downtown, the one on 4th Street. The market is peaking. I think it's time to sell. I watched her very closely. There was a tiny flicker in her eyes, a quick dilation of the pupils. It's the look a predator gets when the prey walks right into the clearing. Sell the 4th Street property, she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. But Arthur, that's your biggest asset. That's your safety net. I waved a hand. I've got enough. What I want is to see Leo finish his work without worrying about grants or loans. If I sell now, I can clear $2 million after taxes. I want to send it all to him. Every cent. A one-time endowment for his research fund in London. I want to see the Miller name on a laboratory wall before I go. She had to grip the edge of the table to keep her composure. $2 million, she whispered. She wasn't thinking about physics. She was thinking about Mark Thorne, the lake cottage, and a life where she didn't have to bring bagels to an old man in a dusty house. Arthur, that is incredibly generous, she said, her voice trembling with what I'm sure she hoped I thought was emotion. Are you sure you're up for the paperwork? It's a lot of stress. I'm an engineer, Alina, I said. I handle stress for a living. But I'll need you to help me coordinate with the university's legal team. I want this done fast. I don't want to wait for the banks to drag their feet. She practically ran out of the house 20 minutes later. She told me she had a closing to attend, but I knew where she was going. I went to my den and turned on the monitor Sam had helped me set up. We had installed a small, high-definition camera in the lake cottage the night before while the place was empty. It was illegal as hell, but Sam said that at this point, we were just gathering intelligence for a war. The screen flickered to life. 10 minutes later, Elena burst into the cottage. Mark Thorne was there, sitting in front of a bank of computers, his headset around his neck. He's selling the downtown building, Elena screamed. She wasn't humming now. She sounded like a buzzsaw hitting a nail. 2 million, Mark. He wants to wire it all to the London account by Friday. Mark stood up, a slow, crazy grin spreading across his face. The voice of my 19-year-old grandson. I felt a sick heat in my stomach. We need to update the AI script, Mark said, his real voice sounding deeper and more arrogant than the digital version. If he's sending 2 million, the ghost needs to sound more grateful than ever. I'll record a new message about a breakthrough in the lab. We'll tell him the university needs a signed authorization form for an expedited international transfer. I watched them on the screen. They were laughing. They were pouring glasses of expensive wine in the middle of the afternoon, celebrating the final harvest of a 10-year scam. Mark started typing, and I heard a synthetic version of Leo's voice repeat the words, "Thank you, Grandpa. You've changed my life." I turned off the monitor. I didn't need to see any more. I called Sam. "They're in," I said. "Good," Sam replied. "I've got the real papers ready. The ones that look like a bank transfer but are actually an admission of debt and a full confession of fiduciary fraud. If she signs them in front of a notary, she's signing her own arrest warrant." Friday morning came with a heavy gray sky. Elena returned this time with a tall, thin man in a cheap suit who she introduced as a private notary. He was probably another one of Mark's friends. She was carrying a single sheet of paper. "Arthur, I've got the fast-track forms here," she said. "If you sign this, the funds will move directly to Leo's research account. No delays. No middleman. It's exactly what you wanted." She laid the paper on the table and handed me a pen. Her hand was steady, but I could see the pulse jumping in her neck. She thought she was about to take the last of my blood. I picked up the pen. I looked at the document. To anyone else, it looked like a standard bank authorization. But Sam had spent 48 hours making sure the fine print buried in the middle was a different story. It was a document that acknowledged the return of $600 in stolen funds and authorized the immediate seizure of the EM real estate properties. I looked at Alina. She gave me a small, encouraging smile, the same smile she gave me when we buried my son. "Just sign at the bottom, Arthur," she whispered. "For Leo." I lowered the pen to the paper. I felt the weight of the last 10 years, the weight of the silence from England, and the weight of the steel box in the attic. I thought about the boy who died on July 14, 2016. "I'm signing this for my family," I said. The ink hit the paper. I wrote my name in clear, bold letters. Arthur Miller, the signature of an engineer who knows exactly how much a structure can bear before it breaks. Elena snatched the paper as soon as I finished. She looked at it like it was a winning lottery ticket. She nodded to the notary, who stamped it with a heavy, satisfying thud. "It's done, Arthur," she said. "You've done a wonderful thing. Leo is going to be so proud of you." She turned to go, her mind already on the $2 million she thought was hitting her account. She was halfway to the door when she stopped. She looked back at me, and for the first time, her smile faltered. I wasn't looking at her with the eyes of a grieving old man. I was sitting straight, my arms watching her with a cold, predatory silence. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I didn't answer, I just pointed to the document in her hand. She looked down at the paper again. She started to read the fine print. I watched the color drain from her face, starting at her forehead and moving down to her chin. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the notary, but he was already looking at the front door. The floorboards didn't groan, but the whole house felt like it was shifting. "You might want to read the second page, Alina," I said. "The one about the July 14th accident report." The hook was set. The charges were live. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt like the foundation under my feet was finally, truly level. I sat in my high-backed leather chair, the one that used to be in my office before I retired. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Elena was standing by the mahogany sideboard, her fingers trembling as she clutched the document I'd just signed. She thought it was a $2 million ticket to a new life. The thin man she called a notary was already reaching for his briefcase, ready to vanish into the morning mist. "Wait," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a heavy iron beam. "I'm not finished with the inspection." Elena turned, a nervous laugh fluttering in her throat. "Arthur, the papers are stamped. It's done. We should let this gentleman go so he can file the transfer." I looked at the notary. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at Elena. I saw the greed, the impatience, and the sheer contempt she had for the old man she thought she'd broken. I reached for my laptop on the desk and pressed a key. The speakers crackled for a second, and then the room was filled with a voice. It wasn't my voice. It was Elena's. "He's selling the downtown building." The recording was clear, sharp, and cold. 2 million mark. "He wants to wire it all to the London account by Friday." Then came the man's voice. Mark Thorne's voice. The one I'd been told belonged to a physics professor. "We need to update the AI script. If he's sending 2 million, the ghost needs to sound more grateful than ever." Elena's face didn't just go pale. It went gray like wet ash. She dropped the document on the floor. The recording kept playing. I let her hear the part where they laughed about me. I let her hear the part where Mark called me a soft-headed old fool who was too blinded by grief to see a lie if it hit him in the face. I turned it off. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise. "Is that the research lab in London, Elena?" I asked. "It sounds a lot like that cottage out by the lake. The one you bought with my pension money." "Arthur," she stammered, her hands flying to her face. That's not what it sounds like. It's a misunderstanding. I stood up. I didn't feel 69 years old. I felt like the man who used to stand on steel girders 20 stories up. I reached in my inner jacket pocket and pulled out the death certificate. The real one. The one from July 14th, 2016. I laid it on the desk between us. "Leo David Miller," I read aloud. Each word felt like a stone being placed in a wall. "Date of death, July 14th, 2016. Cause of death, traumatic brain injury." Elena backed away until she hit the sideboard. A silver picture frame rattled and fell over. "You kept him in a box." "Elena," I said. My voice was low, but it vibrated in the floorboards. "For 10 years, you used a dead boy to rob his own grandfather. You didn't just steal my money. You stole my mourning. You made me pay for a ghost because you knew I loved him more than my own life." The notary made a break for the door. He yanked the handle, but it didn't budge. I'd seen to that. Sam had been waiting on the porch, and the heavy deadbolt was engaged from the outside. "Let me out," the man yelled, his voice cracking. The front door opened slowly. The Samivans walked in, followed by 2 men in dark suits from the county sheriff's office. Sam wasn't carrying a fishing rod today. He was carrying a folder full of bank records, wire transfer logs, and the deed to EM Real Estate Holdings. "It's over, Elena," Sam said. He looked at her with a disgust that made her flinch. "We've already been to the cottage. Mark Thorne is currently explaining himself to the state police. He's already started talking. Men like that always do when the handcuffs come out." Elena looked at me, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. "Arthur, please. I did it for us. David left me with nothing. I had to survive." "You didn't survive, Elena," I said. "You prayed. You found the one crack in my heart, and you poured poison into it for a decade." The deputies stepped forward. One of them took the stamped document from the floor. The one that was actually a confession and an asset forfeiture. Elena didn't fight when they took her arms. She just seemed to deflate, like a structure whose central support had finally given way. As they led her toward the door, she stopped and looked back at me. For a second, I saw the woman I thought I knew. But then I looked at the death certificate on the desk. "I'm calling the board," Sam said, watching them lead her to the cruiser. "Her real estate license is gone as of 5 minutes ago. The fraud charges alone will carry 10 to 15. And with the elder abuse enhancement, she won't be seeing a lake view for a long time." I didn't say anything. I watched the blue lights flash against the living room walls through the window. I watched the car pull away, taking the lie with it. Sam put a hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Arthur?" I looked at the silver picture frame that had fallen. I picked it up. It was a photo of Leo when he was 8. He was holding a small wooden birdhouse we'd built together in the garage. He was smiling. He was real. "I'm better than I've been in 10 years, Sam," I said. "I've been living in a house built on sand. It's finally down. Now I can see the horizon." I walked over to the fireplace and picked up the small violin case I'd taken from the attic. I opened it. The wood was dusty, but it was still beautiful. It was a real thing. I realized then that Alina hadn't won. She'd taken the money, but she hadn't taken the boy. She'd only hidden him. And now, for the first time since that terrible day in 2016, I didn't have to listen for a digital echo. I could just remember the sound of his laughter in the garage. I sat back down in my chair. The house felt empty, but it was a clean kind of empty. The leak in the attic was fixed. The paperwork was done. The inspection was over. I looked at the photo of Leo one last time before setting it upright on the mantel. I didn't see a genius physicist. I saw my grandson. And for the first time in a decade, I didn't feel like a fool. I felt like a man who had finally brought his family home. The legal storm moved through my life and left a quiet I hadn't known in years. Sam was as good as his word. Within a few months, the court had frozen Alina's accounts and seized the properties she bought with my pension. Mark Thorne took a plea deal, and Alina is currently serving 10 to 15 years for grand larceny and elder abuse. People in town still talk, of course. They look at me with that tilted head pity when I'm at the hardware store. But I don't mind it. An engineer knows that once you've cleared away the debris, you can finally see the site for what it truly is. I spent most of May in the attic. I didn't go up there to hide. I went up there to clean. I hired a local crew to fix the roof properly, and then I spent days sorting through the boxes. I found Leo's old baseball glove, his school drawings, and that small violin case. I took them all down to the cemetery and sat by the headstone Alina had kept secret for a decade. It was a simple granite marker. It was dusty and forgotten. I spent the afternoon scrubbing the stone until David and Leo's names shone in the sunlight. I sat there and talked to them. I didn't talk about physics or London. I just told them I was sorry it took me so long to find them. The house feels different now. The silence isn't a lie anymore. It's just peace. I sold that commercial building downtown, but I didn't wire the money to a ghost. I set up a real trust. It's a scholarship for local kids who want to study horticulture or trades. Kids who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty. Sarah was the first one I signed up. She didn't want to take the money at first. She's got that stubborn pride you only see in people who've had to work for every inch of ground they stand on. I told her it wasn't a gift. I told her it was an investment in a foundation I knew was solid. These days, you can usually find us in the back garden. My knees still ache, so I sit on a wooden bench I built while Sarah works the soil. She knows more about plants than I ever will, but I'm teaching her how to measure and how to plan for the long term. We were looking at the rose bushes this morning. "You see that, Sarah?" I asked, pointing to a graft on an old stem. "You have to make sure the connection is clean. If the bond is weak, the first frost will take the whole thing down. But if you do it right, it grows back stronger than the original." She nodded, her hands covered in dark, rich earth. She looks a bit like David when she focuses. That same quiet intensity. It's a good thing to see life growing in a place that used to be full of shadows. I still have my smartphone, but I don't use the apps Alina installed. I don't listen for digital echoes. I listen to the wind in the oaks and the sound of Sarah's shovel hitting the dirt. I'm 69 years old, and I finally stopped building bridges to nowhere. I'm right here on the ground, and for the first time in 10 years, I'm not a fool. I'm just a man who knows exactly what his life is worth. Thank you for sitting by the fire with me tonight. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to our channel. There are more truths waiting to be uncovered. Sleep well.